Hey, what's up? It's your boy John. Today we're going to be talking about why electric vehicles are not the mainstream norm yet. Let's get it. So just in the past year, we've seen some huge steps towards the electric vehicle industry. We've seen automobile companies like Ford and GM committing to an all-electric future. Ford is aiming to be 40% all-electric in their fleet by 2030, and GM is looking to be 100% all-electric by 2035. We also have companies like Lucid, Rivian, and Nio all making their steps into the EV space as well. And we can't forget to mention the Big Daddy Tesla, which, contrary to popular belief, is the current leading EV company. Now, let's just dial in on Tesla. Tesla was founded in 2003 with the goal of being both a car company and a tech company. It wasn't until 2006 when their first car was announced, the original Tesla Roadster, and it wasn't until 2008 when production began. Since then, they've introduced the Model S, the Model X, the Model 3, and the Model Y. They also have an updated Tesla Roadster coming out and the much anticipated Cybertruck, as well as Tesla semis. So with an EV company like Tesla that's been around for almost 20 years, why have we not seen a mass adoption of electric vehicles in our society? Obviously, there are many reasons someone can argue, but let's dig a little deep and look at some examples. So in early 1886, Carl Benz applied for a patent for a vehicle powered by a gas engine. A lot of other companies followed right after in the late 1800s, leading into the early 1900s. At this current time, automobiles were exclusively for the wealthy. Most cars were built custom to the customer, and usually was one or two people building the entire car. As most of us know now, Henry Ford came into the early 1900s and revolutionized the car. He combined the concept of an assembly line and combined that with mass producing a vehicle that could be affordable, the Ford Model T. Now, the Model T debuted in 1908, and by 1920, there was 5 million cars in America. Now, having a car is great, but it needs underlying support. The two main things being fuel for it to be drivable and a road for it to drive on. Now, at this point in time, there were some early conceptions of roads being used for horse-drawn vehicles. With cars being used more often and at a higher capacity, these roads deteriorated very quickly. Sand clay roads were later adopted as they were more durable for horse-drawn vehicles and gas-powered vehicles. Now, it wasn't until 1956, almost 50 years after the Model T was first introduced, that U.S. Congress passed the State Highway Act. This designated billions of dollars in the creation of state highways. Now, before gas stations existed, we were buying gas at pharmacies, general stores, and hardware stores. It wasn't until 1913 when they first introduced a drive-in gas station. This was 5 years after the Model T was first introduced. And it wasn't until 1947 when we first introduced the modern-day self-service gas pump, which we see now. And even then, that was not popularized until the 70s. Looking at today in 2022, we have over 150,000 gas stations across the U.S. So looking at today's world, we, at the bare minimum, need a driver's license to operate a vehicle. And we also have laws that we need to abide by while operating it as well. Now, if we look back in the history books again, it wasn't until 1966 when U.S. Congress passed the National Travel and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. So if we look at this act, this was the first mandatory federal safety standards that we've ever set as a country. So at this time, there was a lot of deaths caused by car accidents. So this obviously had Congress talking and how we could implement more safety standards on the road. So after this act was passed, a lot of safety standards were set, like seat belts, shatterless windshields, rear view mirrors, all these regulations that companies need to abide by when creating their car. We also saw some improvements in the roads. We had barriers for opposite traffics. We had guardrails. We have better illumination with paint, etc. So again, this was the first act that was passed. So before then, there was essentially no restrictions federally for a car. Obviously, there might have been some states regulating, but essentially no restrictions. So we might not see it as an everyday consumer, but these cars need to abide by certain rules when it comes to creating the cars. So the Cybertruck is actually a great example of this. When it was first introduced, it had no side mirrors. With Tesla software, when you trigger the left or right signal, a camera will show each side. So essentially not needing a side mirror for these. However, regulations in the U.S. require you to have side mirrors. So for them to be able to make it a vehicle available to purchase and use in the United States, they had to implement those side mirrors. P.S. Elon tweeted about this, saying that they would be removable, so you could essentially still have the same look of when it was first introduced. So I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm rambling here, but the key takeaway is when we introduce a product that's so revolutionary, sometimes we also need to introduce underlying support to make it a usable product in our society, and sometimes that can take a while. Do I think that we are experiencing this same phenomenon when it comes to electric vehicles? Yes and no. Let me explain with another example. So as we all know today, the iPhone is one of the most revolutionary and successful products of our time. They changed the way we communicate with our friends and family. They changed the way we do business. They changed the way we carry our everyday lives. So let's take the same concept of the Model T and apply it to the iPhone. So what support does the iPhone need? It needs a battery that can at least last the entire day, and it also needs a support system that is going to give you access to the web, to send texts, and access your apps, everything that they're advertising, right? So iPhone is a great example of the other end of that spectrum that we saw of support in the Model T. So iPhone was easily integratable with the current technology we had. They were able to use current networks like AT&T, Verizon, etc., and they were also able to use cell phone towers that we already had. They were also able to use current battery technology like they probably use in the iPods and older cell phones. So imagine if there was no such thing as phone networks or Wi-Fi or cell phone towers. Apple would not only introduce the iPhone, they would have to introduce the network they would have to create to support the iPhone. This is why Apple was able to expand iPhone in such little time, as well as Android and Google joining with their smartphones. All that existing technology that they used in cell phones and telephones, they were able to adapt that and apply it to the iPhone. So back to the question, do I think we're facing these issues with the electric vehicle space? So I think that the electric vehicle industry, mainly Tesla, is somewhere in between Apple and Ford when it comes to transitioning to an all-electric future. It's sort of a hybrid of both because it faces the pros of each, but it also faces cons. So like Apple, Tesla was able to use some of the underlying support that IC vehicles had already introduced, one of them being roads. I know it sounds crazy to think, but imagine if when Tesla introduced the vehicle, they also had to introduce roads and say, we need to create this thing called asphalt for these cars to be drivable. So as we know, underlying support can be a great thing, but it can also be a bad thing. It's definitely slowed down Tesla and other electric vehicle growth. So a gas-powered vehicle doesn't have anything inherently wrong with it. It drives fine, it's safe, it gets good gas mileage, and it's relatively affordable. What Tesla offers past that, if you're not looking at anything else, is a safer drive or a better drive, a cleaner drive. That unfortunately isn't enough for an everyday consumer when they're so used to their current lifestyle of just putting gas in weekly, the occasional oil change. So unfortunately for Tesla, it hasn't had this out with the old, in with the new jump. It's definitely dealing with a lot of people saying, wow, that's great, it runs on a battery. Wow, that's great, it's so innovative, but it's not pushing the consumer in that direction. Also, Tesla does not conform to the conventional gas stations that we've already created in the past 100 years. So if we look back at the example with Apple and the cell phone towers, Tesla did have to do that and introduce their own network of charging throughout the country. And this is another reason why people might not feel confident in their everyday life using an electric vehicle. They might feel like they're going to lose a charge in an inconvenient area, when that's simply not the case. So at this point in time, Tesla and the electric vehicle space is only growing more and more each day, but it feels like society isn't ready for the electric vehicle world, or maybe they aren't convinced yet. When consumers figure out that they can charge their car at home at an extremely smaller margin of cost than gas, and they also see how much more convenient it is than a gas station, we will see a shift. I also believe that apartment complexes and business sites will start increasing their EV chargers as they see this shift as well. So a few more points to look at. Just a few years ago in 2019, RS Automotive in Maryland was the first gas station in the US to transition from a gas station to an all-electric vehicle station. So fun fact, the average gas station owner's profit margin when it comes to gas sales is only 1.4%. So owners of gas stations' main profit actually comes from the convenience store side, from the drinks and snacks, etc. that they sell. So how loyal do you think these gas station owners are to the actual gas? The owner's sole purpose of having gas pumps is to bring people inside the store to potentially buy things inside the convenience store. They could potentially be making more money with EV charging stations. However, since electric vehicles are not mainstream, that's going to cut out a lot of traffic right now. So with electric vehicles not being mainstream, it's not smart to be an EV charging only station. But we could very much potentially see a shift with these gas stations eventually from gas pumps to EV charging stations. But even then, these poor gas station owners, people will not be using these gas stations to charge their vehicles. They will be charging at home. At this point, the only people that are going to be using these gas stations are people that are traveling long distances or for some reason do not have access to a charger at home or wherever they may be. I'm very excited about seeing where this EV space goes and seeing how it's going to be integrated into our everyday lives. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and comment if you enjoyed it or if you hated it, if you have any questions or if you have anything to add. We'd love to hear it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.